Have you ever had a moment where reality felt so strange that it seemed surreal? Now imagine that feeling wasn't just a moment, but a continuous lived experience. This is where my research begins. I study cultural frameworks, systems that help us understand how people make meaning of their values, their traditions, their norms. Here's the problem my research seeks to address. Traditional cultural frameworks often fail to capture the full complexity of Black lived experience in the Americas. How does one describe a reality where the absurd and the mundane coexist daily? Where, as poet Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote in 1895, we wear the mask that grins and lies. A reality where survival itself often requires a certain kind of performance. More specifically, I study Afrosurrealism, a cultural framework that emerged from Black intellectual thought. Afrosurrealism is a theory and a method for articulating how Black people navigate a reality in which they feel is often fundamentally surreal along social and political lines. It's in recognition of the fact that for many Black people, the everyday and the extraordinary are constantly intersecting. Allow me to provide you with a quick, concrete cultural example. John Coltrane's version of My Favorite Things. On the surface, My Favorite Things is just another Broadway show tune that everyone knows. But Coltrane takes this familiar melody as a doorway, walking listeners into a 14-minute, complicated spiritual jazz journey many perhaps would not have entered otherwise. It's not about creating something zany or odd for the sake of it. It's about identifying and engaging with those realities that already exist in order to question the notion of a universal way of seeing and living. John Coltrane takes this familiar melody and transforms it, revealing Afrosurrealism's potential to communicate the power of Black cultural innovation and thought. You might be familiar with Afrofuturism, which imagines Black futures through science fiction. Afrosurrealism is different. It's about that productive tension that generates from the blending of stories and symbols, expressing surreality as an alternative form of perception and perspective. Why does this matter? It matters because when we can name something, when we can give language to a perspective and understand its rules, its structures, and patterns, we can understand social, emotional, and even psychological information much more effectively. It matters because when mainstream society's understanding of common sense is premised around the idea of one primary perspective, it begs the question, how do we create methods for understanding how people navigate multiple social worlds simultaneously? Studying Afrosurrealism matters to me because it helps me better grasp how my Black American grandmothers, in dire circumstances in the Jim Crow South, developed brilliant strategies for creating a way out of no way, strategies that we still utilize and build upon today. Now, this sounds kind of interesting, right? But how do we apply an Afro-Surrealist perspective to the real world? Allow me to provide 3 core Afro-Surrealist principles that can help transform our approach to cultural strategy, technological advancement, and design thinking. The first is what writer D. Scott Miller calls strategic masking, the use of dissemblance to highlight deeper strategies. We see this in the artwork of Carol Walker, where she takes 19th century Victorian silhouettes and uses them to tackle hard truths about American slavery. The silhouette form itself masks detail, while paradoxically revealing disturbing visions from the past. The Black cutout figures create a polite, respectable, even a safe distance, allowing visitors to engage with horrific content they might otherwise prefer to avoid. This is not about spectacle. It's about using a familiar form in an unfamiliar way to expose an angle we might otherwise miss. The second is what we call recognition of inherent distortions. Similar to standpoint epistemology and sociology, the recognition of inherent distortions is the idea that what might seem abnormal for one group is actually the normal for the other. In machine learning, researchers might label certain misfit phenomena as edge cases, but a shift to an Afro-Surrealist perspective lets us know that in centering these edge cases, we uncover a whole new world of different systems, strategies, and designs that apply centrally to a different demographic. Take facial recognition technology. What we might consider anomalies in facial detection often reflect systemic blind spots that mirror more complex social issues. Lastly, we have temporal collapse, the Afro-surrealist principle that argues that the past, the present, and the future can be experienced simultaneously. Think about what this might do for museum and archive design. Progressive curators are now creating spaces where historical artifacts are in direct conversation with contemporary art, where oral narratives hold the same weight as written documents. By collapsing the borders between time and historiography, we can have exhibitions where visitors can actively learn and contribute to an evolving, multi-layered historical narrative. What these three principles share in common is Afro-surrealism's core insight that practical innovations can actually come from what most people deem as impractical, impossible, inconvenient, or altogether surreal. In sum, these standard one-size-fits-all models are simply inadequate. In an era where we often highly value and prioritize these hard, scientific, technical solutions, I argue that Black cultural studies frameworks, such as an Afro-surrealism, provides a creative and alternative kind of scientific method, one in which we can use culture and perspective to ask different questions from different angles to come up with some transformative solutions. It reminds us that our most profound collective solutions come from the embrace of human expansiveness, because sometimes slowing down to understand what might seem surreal is the most realistic thing we can do. Thank you.